Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for being here with us today at the Paris Peace Forum in an afternoon which is going to be, I hope, a great discussion on liberté, égalité, disparité. So you were waiting for fraternité, but no, we're going to be talking about disparities, about how difficult it is, even today, to close the gap. And I'm talking, of course, about the gender gap, the one that we thought we wouldn't even be talking about in 2023. I mean, come on. Feminist movement started so long ago, and we've gone so far. And yet, today, we see all these movements pushing us back ages, decades back. And we saw it with the pandemic. We discussed it at length last year when we were all recovering and reliving after what had happened. But we see that with the wars. We see that with also populist regimes arriving to power in some of our democracies. We see that nothing is ever for granted. So I'm sure you're all aware, but we had a very interesting discussion and thought about this very topic here in France at the National Assembly when we decided to constitutionalize the right to abortion. And that was actually just one example of how we feel that there's a need to protect, to constitutionalize rights that maybe we took for granted too easily. So to discuss this topic, I am extremely pleased to have an amazing panel here with me at the Paris Peace Forum. So I'm a French MP, member of the Foreign Affairs Commission, Vice President of the Foreign Affairs Commission, and elected by French people living in Latin America and the Caribbean. As strange as that might sound, I'm actually elected by the diaspora, the French diaspora in that area of the world, so I can talk about France, but also maybe a tiny bit about Latin America and the Caribbean. But you're not going to listen to me talking today because we have panelists that have much more interesting things to say. And immediately to my left, we have Maria Fernanda Espinosa from Mexico, who's the Executive Director of the Global Women's Leaders Voice for Change and Inclusion, but who was also the President of the AGNU and who has been involved in human and women's rights movements for decades now. Can I say decades?
Since I was born, a long time ago.
Thank you so much for being with us, Maria Fernanda. It's really an honor to have you here. Then immediately to her left, we have Gulnora Mukamadieva, and please tell me if I spell that. Yeah, correct. You're the global lead for the Aga Khan Foundation, and we are really excited to hear about what you do as a foundation, but also your personal involvement, and honestly, you can tell us all about that. Thank you so much for being here. We also have Matthew Hart. Matthew, thank you for being in a all-women's panel. That's
happens all the time.
Really? It does? It's kind of rare. Do you? Okay. Perhaps because you are the Executive Director of the Global Philanthropy Project, and you'll tell us in a minute what that is and what exactly you do to improve women's rights across the world. And finally, we have Trisha Shetty, who's the founder of an NGO in India addressing that very topic, and it's called She Says. And perhaps you will also tell us more about what She Says does. So what I suggest we do, because we of course have, as always, limited time, is that we let our panelists introduce this topic with maybe a focus where they want to go, and then I'll follow up with a few questions, and then you can jump in with some additional questions, and hopefully with this very lively way of opening up the discussion about a topic that we hear so much about, that we've discussed so much, that I'm even surprised or maybe excited and happy to see that you're still coming to these topics and see how we can actually try to come up with real ideas as to how to change things, because we really need to address this issue in an efficient manner. So Maria Fernanda, perhaps if you'd like to just start with some introductory comments, that would be amazing.
Well, first of all, I'm delighted to be here, and thank you, Eleonora. First of all, for representing our region, Latin America and the Caribbean at the French Assembly, and for co-leading the Foreign Relations Committee. It's not a minor thing here in France. And I think that we have all heard that the Sustainable Development Goals, that only 12% of the SDGs are on track, in that no indicators on SDG 5 on women's rights and gender equality have been fully met. And this is not a coincidence. We are witnessing, as you said, regressive laws, backlash on women's rights, persistent violence, and basically an exacerbation, a widening of the gender equality gap worldwide. And the progress that we have witnessed in the past, first of all, is slow and also uneven and also frail. So, as you said very well, that we cannot take our success or little gains for granted. Inequality and gender inequality is a political choice. So it's not that we are talking about something that needs to be an afterthought or in the backstage. We are literally here in this room. We are kind of backstage, in the Paris Forum, and that has also it's a symbolic message, I would say. So, and why is it so difficult? Because we are 50+ percent of the world's population, so we're not a minority. We are not a vulnerable group, as we often we're called, and the vulnerable group, semicolon, women, indigenous peoples, persons with disabilities. No. We are 50+ of the world's population, number one. We are capable, we are powerful, we are entitled, we deserve to be in positions of power, we deserve to be in tables where decisions are taken. Believe me, in my almost 30 years of diplomatic experience and looking at how, the spaces of the UN, where I had the privilege, to preside the UN General Assembly. When you say the UN General Assembly is the main body of the UN, in 78 years, only 4 women have had that position. 4 women, all from the global south. I am the only from Latin America and the Caribbean. So numbers also matter. The issue of representation of women in the international system. I'm going to talk a little bit afterwards, if possible, about Global Women Leaders. It's a world network of former foreign ministers like myself, former heads of state and government, all women basically working for a fairer and more representative international system, for a feminist multilateral system. And I think it's worthwhile, but again, as I said, it's not only an issue of numbers, it's an issue of fairness, of justice, of representation, of having structures and governance arrangements that represent the world demography, but also the capacities and the possibilities we bring to the table as women.
And have you seen in your career that there's been a progress that more women are getting to the table? Because we gave that very bad figure as to how some rights are actually going backwards in some countries where you have regimes fighting them and you have a lot of movements that are actually fighting against women's rights. But do you feel like maybe with some perspective that maybe some more women have accepted political functions, that there's a bit of hope at the end of the tunnel? Like what would you say about?
Well, what we see is that there is no incremental change. Okay. And it becomes better and better and better. It doesn't happen that way, unfortunately. We progress a little bit and we go backwards. We still have 25%, women in parliaments, which means that 75% of parliamentarians continue to be men. The representation of women in cabinets, only 13 countries have achieved gender parity in cabinets. And if we look at the number of countries with female heads of state and government, the number is also very small, 26 countries out of 194 countries. So there is a lot of homework that we still need to do. Believe me, when I was growing up as a feminist, I thought that quotas were not necessary because merit was, it was all about merit. And we do have merit, believe me. But now, if you ask me, we do. We need to continue to keep a quota system in the political spectrum. You would be with me on that front. Agree. And not only that, not only to respect the quota system, but work towards a world where we do not need a quota system anymore, which is the ideal scenario. But today and now, I would say, please do keep the quota system, respect the quotas, and even then we are where we are with 25% women in parliaments around the world. So, and again, this is not only about numbers, it is about justice, it is about the quality of our democracies, it is about the quality we bring to decision-making and the political space. And you are an example of that.
Well, thank you, and so are all of us. But about that, maybe I'll give the floor to the other participants. But I think the Mexican example is extremely interesting because the law in Mexico that requires equality not only into the candidates that are presented for a given seat, but actually for the elections themselves, do ensure this true balance, which we don't have in France. In France, it's been 20 years since we had the laws that oblige every single candidate to have, mix of women and men in every list and so forth. But then you have techniques by political parties putting women in places that they know they're going to lose, and men in places they know they're going to win, and then you end up with unbalanced as we see today. So perhaps just a word on Mexico, and
one word to say something. I love Mexico, but I am from Ecuador, and but we it's good, and it's a country that had pioneered on feminist foreign policy, for example, and in many other fronts. I'm speaking about Ecuador. We passed a law with alternation for presidential elections. So it's either the president or the vice president. It has to be a woman in the formula. And I think that has worked in the last election. That actually worked. And the quota system also for parliament. We don't have a quota system for cabinet. I have been member of my own cabinet, and believe me, the numbers go increasingly down and down and down and down. This, of course, should change, and I'm dying to listen to my co-panelists.
Thank you so much. No, you're right. I mentioned Mexico because of the connection we have with the Next Generation Forum with France, and the fact that it was a UN initiative. But no, you're right. And perhaps we can discuss policies and how they interact. But before that, going to the AGACAN and what you do, could you give us some examples, perhaps, of positive? We need some positiveness today, right? Seeing how the world looks like, of projects and programs that you've implemented that you feel can be reproduced in other parts of the world and that you would want to mention in this panel.
Great. Thank you so much, Madame Carol. So good afternoon, everyone. Many thanks for joining this session. And my name is Gulnora Muhammadiva. I'm from Aga Khan Foundation. And we work at the grassroots level and across very difficult contexts and circumstances. And our work, the communities where we serve, it's from Afghanistan to Kenya, from Syria to Pakistan. And from that community perspective, let me pause for a moment where we stand today. I think in this room we may all agree that patriarchal norms are outdated, but in fact they are reality across many communities where we work. And what we see is that, on the contrary, they are reinforced and reinstated. And therefore, if you look at all the latest UN data, we are really far from in terms of overturning them. But again, you wanted to hear more positive, so I'm not a pessimist, and I'm more realist and pragmatist. I think that from our community work, what is really clear is that the change is possible when it is driven from the within, and when we give enough time for this change. again, we cannot impose from outside, no, we can rush this process. And therefore, since Beijing, everything that we've done collectively is either imposing or rushing these processes. So therefore, I think we need feminist movements, but again, they need to be genuinely homegrown. They need to have the possibility to set their own trajectory. They need to have their own heroines, locally grown heroines, and they also need to have their own time frames. I think this is really crucial. And again, I'm not arguing here against the universality of women and girls' rights. What I'm trying to say is that despite the backlash that we have across the globe, it's really possible to advance this agenda. As long as we understand the diversity of these feminist movements, we understand the context and the regions they operate. So therefore, precisely because of these reasons, we can share and learn so much from Aga Khan Foundation work, because it's in the root of anything we do that the change, again, must be driven from the communities, and the communities need to feel empowered that they're in charge of this change. And across the Aga Khan Foundation programs, we have a community-driven, human-centered approach. So for any initiatives that we start or we continue, we have a very close consultation process. So we engage religious leaders, community leaders, men and women, so that they have a say in this any new initiatives that we design. So again, I would like to emphasize that the change is the process requires kind of long-term planning. If we rush or if we have short-term ambitions, it will not be accepted by the communities. And often, if it's seen imposed from outside, we don't kind of see the impact. And finally, I would like to say that we have lots of interesting initiatives across the Aga Khan Foundation programs. They're focused on women's economic empowerment, bringing more women through the local governance structures, health and education, etc. We don't call it feminist movements, but in fact, if you go and see our work on the ground, the change is happening, and it's a positive change. Thank you.
No, thank you. And why don't you call them feminist movements?
Again, I think the most important thing is that to see the change in the women and girls' lives, and the changes that are accepted by those communities. We can bring different definition, you know, but if you look at the work, if you look at the change which is happening, this is gender equality and women's empowerment. But yeah, I'll share more examples later.
So no matter how you frame it, what matters is what you bring to the communities and to the girls' life.
Exactly, and the terminology is really important, you know, for any new kind of context you go, any new regions. We had an example in Pakistan where we were really skeptical going into one of the areas working on women's economic empowerment. And after 1 year of project implementation, the leaders of that region reached out to us saying, we want to cooperate with you, please bring your project to our district as well, because we see lots of women dying in home deliveries, and we do see you are bringing lots of health innovation. So this is how it happens, you know, like you don't have to kind of bring very heavy loaded terminology into some of these difficult contexts.
No, I like that. I like the pragmatic approach and the fact that you're actually doing things, no matter how you call them, that are actually improving their lives. And we talked about all these complicated forces and everything that is blocking and limiting progress in terms of women's rights, not only also LGBT's rights. Perhaps, Matthew, you can tell us a bit more about your experience. And I would be extremely interested, and I think our audience too, as to what do you do at the foundation? How does that work? And how are you coordinating that response?
That's great. Thank you. Thank you for the invitation and the coordination and the staff that organized our space for us. And also, yeah, it's always remarkable that we always end up in the far corner in the back across a long hallway to have these conversations.
It was worse last year. We're getting better. This is a real room.
Okay, onward to the main stage next year. My name is Matthew Hart. I'm the executive director of a project called the Global Philanthropy Project. We're a collaboration of 23 public and private foundations who are committed to increasing and improving financial resources, grant making, for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and intersex people in the global South and East. We have actually one of our members here, the Fund for Global Human Rights, hello. And also one of the sponsors of this event, Open Society Foundations, is one of our founders. So it's great to be here. I would say for this piece, this conversation, our work really falls of a gap within a gap. So really what we're talking about are about lesbian, bisexual, and trans people, and how that work and the lives of those people rest within a broad continuum of an agenda for sexual rights and freedom. And I think as I'm hearing us talk, you know, we approach together a set of broad barriers for participation and freedom. And that, for us, we've articulated it as sort of this collusion between radical faith fundamentalisms and aspiring authoritarianism. And so all of us can kind of imagine what that is in our own context, right? And those forces that might be called many things, right? The anti-rights agenda, an anti-gender agenda, those forces are weaponizing the lives and bodies of LGBTI people and women. And we believe that there is an opportunity to work together collectively to build powerful social justice movements, academic movements, empower journalists for documentation, to create space to tell stories and to make visible a larger agenda that is broadly inclusive of LGBTI people. I would say another sort of component of that we think about is there are also forces within progressive feminist movements that are gender restrictive, that are asking lesbian and trans people to step out of political conversations and to step out of political arenas. And our work also is to support those people to remain centered, to have the opportunity to participate, and to ensure that they have resources to have voice in critical spaces like this, for example.
Can you give some examples of that?
Sure. I think, for example, I think there's movement-based work that could happen. So funding LBQ-led projects in regions all around the world that might be in, like there might be a sort of a contest right now about the legality of the lives of lesbian people. Here's a great example. Actually, this is a really good example in Europe. So right now, in Europe, second parent adoption for lesbian couples is being attacked, right? So women who may have a family, there is usually a birth parent and an adoptive parent. Right now, those second parent adoptions are being rescinded. And so you could imagine, let's say I'm in a relationship with someone and I get a letter from the state that says, from this day forward, you are no longer the parent of this child. Right? So that alone is terrible. But what that really means is, who can pick that child up from school? Who can go to the hospital? How can you ensure that that person receives your will? How can you participate in the daily life in your village if you are not seen as an actual parent? And more dangerously, how can we allow the state to be the actor that removes rights? Right? So this is an example, I think, of the danger that we allow, especially LGBTQ people, to be used as kind of a canary, right? Like, if we can succeed in that regard, if we can just take those rights away and no one really bothers, it sets a precedent. So even though very few people might actually be affected, there's currently a court case of 35 families around this that we're funding to fight this. But I think in the broader context of a shift to the right on this continent and around the world, there are tests being done, and those affected and impacted are usually the most vulnerable. And in this case that I just shared, are lesbian parents.
I think it's great that you point out that even when we think we've gained rights, even when we think we're in a democracy and we're going in the right direction, you have some tedious and sinuous movements that can actually have a huge impact. I was talking about France and the abortion, but you have, where does that come from? That comes from the decision in the United States that actually reversed the Roe versus Wade decision. And the examples you give about LGBTI people are very telling. I think we should never take any anything for granted. And if there's one thing we should take from this panel is that the fight has to continue. But then how does the fight materializes when you're leading an NGO in India to empower women and also to educate them and help them have the tools necessary to fight against assault? Perhaps, Trisha, you can tell us a bit about your organization, but also your vision globally as to where we're heading and how we fight against these movements, these anti-feminist movements.
Thank you. Again, thank you for invoking quotas. I am a huge fan of quotas as well. So in terms of India, I come from a land of absolute great contradictions, okay? Also, I think the baseline is so different when it comes to different countries. For us, equality was guaranteed within our constitution. Within our constitution, a founding father said to us that we will have not just equality in front of the eyes of the law, but also equal protection by the law, right? For us, our consent laws are so progressive. Our consent law says if at the time of giving consent, you are found to be inebriated, drugged, drunk, even if you have consumed it, right? If your toxic levels say it's above a certain percentage, your consent is automatically vitiated. That means your consent by the eyes of the law is automatically considered as invalid, and any sort of sexual intercourse that you have been engaged in would be considered as a crime because you did not know the nature of what you were giving consent to. So stories, horrific stories like the Stanford rape case, where the survivor was blamed for saying, you consumed alcohol willingly, would never happen in my country, back home. I bring this up also, you talk about abortion. Let me tell you, in my country right now, we've had really progressive, abortion has always been protected for us, okay? We have really progressive mandates that have come out. We had a 2021 amendment in our Abortion Act that said, it widened the scope and replaced by any married woman and husband to by any woman and her partner to protect the rights of every sort of relationship to ensure that they have access to equal reproductive rights. We had a justice because there was a case like a month ago where a woman was seeking late abortion beyond the medically allocated time limit. And the justice said, and I quote, fetus has no separate identity from a mother. A fetus has no separate identity from her mother. A woman cannot be forced to undergo pregnancy at risk of physical and mental trauma. And that right to reproductive health is a woman's human right, which includes right to abortion. This is India. And by contrast, when you hear what the global north is doing, and when I say global north, I'm talking about from an economic perspective, not purely from a geographical perspective, it is a disservice, right? So we as Indians, many people from the global south, firstly, we have colonial laws that till date tend to hamper our progress. And then we witness what's happening by the custodians of democracy, human rights in the global north. And honestly, it's a dystopian reality for us too, where we do not understand what sort of regression we are witnessing by custodians of religion, right, whose obsession is to control a woman's body, control women's autonomy, and try to get this within a legislative purview. So I'll talk more about global north, global south, but I just wanted to set the context in terms of India and where we stand. And also, let me tell you, right now, we don't have equal rights when it comes to marriage for queer people, for gender non-conforming people, but it just got legislated recently. And what's interesting is that courts said, although we can't do that because that should fall under the purview of parliamentarians, as courts cannot legislate upon laws, what they did say is a trans man can marry a woman, and that would be recognized as a legal marriage because for all intents and purposes, a trans man is a man. So, it's nuances. It's not equal progress. There's still a long way to go. Marital rape is not a crime in my country. We need equal marriage rights for queer people, for LGBTQI people. They need equal rights to adoption as well and family property rights. But there is something to be said about where global north stands in regards to their compass in comparison to us.
I think that's fascinating because perhaps it's just me, but we have a very ethnocentric vision of things, and yes, you would assume that global north is ahead in terms of rights, and it's not the case at all. So if we can deconstruct some preconceived ideas and think about how our societies work, and to go back to what Matt was saying about, like very small going back into things that we had already achieved. Perhaps I'll give the mic again to you to see how you can react to these statements about this global south, global north, and how do we, as a community, in a multilateral arena, have the power to fight against all these forces, be it fundamentalist forces or religious forces that are fighting against the progress that we're making generally. I don't know if you have a mic. Perhaps you don't.
It was hiding, but I'm basically. I think that the progress on the women's rights agenda and the gender equality agenda, has to look at this, multi-scale, up and down kind of movement. Why? Because we see, for example, the most progressive laws and norms come from local governments sometimes, come from progressive mayors, and the smaller level of government at the national level. Also, and yes, and I really thank you for demystifying the idea that it is in the north that where all the progressive laws happen, and the full deployment of affirmative action for women and gender equality doesn't go that way, because we have recently witnessed in some Nordic countries some regressions, some countries that have explicitly went backwards on their feminist foreign policies. Countries that were pioneering feminist foreign policy, just saying no, not anymore. So I think that this going up and down, informing the global, bringing the global to the local is extremely important. And of course, I cannot be objective here, but I think that the multilateral space as a norm setting, policy setting, accountability space is more and more relevant and important than ever. I had the privilege to serve in the steering committee of the Generation Equality Forum, and we saw that was a way. It was called Generation Equality Forum because we weren't able, and I was the president of the General Assembly at the time, we weren't able to pass a mandate to do a Beijing plus 25. So there was this configuration of the Generation Equality Forum, which ended up being extremely creative, extremely innovative in terms of the new multilateralism, because it brought not only government sitting at the table, but also civil society, the feminist movement, the private sector, the philanthropic sector, coming together for a new, I would say, boosted agenda on gender equality and women's rights. We have to make sure that this agenda, it comes and improves the lives of women, and all genders at the ground level, at the national level, becomes and transforms into lawmaking at the national level. But above all, in listening to you, yes, we need better laws, better policies. I said that gender equality and women's rights is a political choice, true. But there is something that we always repeat in this fora, which is, the need for a profound transformation of our cultures and the way we are socialized and the way we grow up, and to make sure that there is this civilizational shifts or cultural shifts that really transform patriarchy into a gender equal affirmative action kind of a modus vivendi in a way. And this is a tough call, because you can change laws, you can change regulations, you can change policies, you can invest more. The investment part is extremely important. We don't have time to discuss, but you know how underfunded women are in general, in every front. Yes. Not only women's movements and the feminist movement, but when we decide on budgets at the national level, when we decide how much money you put into, you know, countering gender-based violence at the national level, for example, you know, affirmative action in economic empowerment for women, in social protection, in care work. We see that there's a lot of homework ahead of us. But if the culture, the patriarchal culture does not change, we will see these regressions, these backlashes. We will see, you know, our rights, our dignity you really put, you know, under scrutiny, and that is something that gives us, you know, more homework to do. The need for a stronger feminist multilateral system, but the need also to work collectively to connect the networks, to build networks of networks ahead.
Thank you, Maria Fernanda. You're right. We need to change the culture. We need to change the way we think, and we need to change the way we interact from the very beginning. And thank you again. I mean, again, I'm really excited to have you here, because you followed that movement, that generation equality. You followed that trend, and now here we are. And what comes next? And I think Gulnora can tell us about, because you are in direct contact with these faith fundamentalists educating villages, and as you were saying about the semantics, as you were saying about how you need to act but maybe not say what you're doing. Can you tell us more about that, or your reflections generally about how to change the culture?
Yeah, first of all, I'd like to second what Maria said. Unfortunately, what is happening now, the whole national women machinery needs to be reformed. We do see all the countries sign the CEDAW Convention. They do on annual basis reporting. But what we see is the Committee for Women and Family Affairs in most of the countries where I at least work, they are underfunded. They don't get enough funding even from the state budget, first of all. They're very project focused. So if any kind of international actors come and they have 3-5-year projects, they implement it. They don't have even enough funding to run shelters. Yeah, this is the first kind of point I wanted to make. Secondly, I'm also a big fan of quotas. I think that we have to nurture the talent when they're still at the local level, you know. But at the same time, I don't see many actors supporting local governance reforms in most of the countries, again, where we work, because of the shrinking space, because of the term civil society sometimes is even threatening, we don't see much of funding going to local governance reforms. And this is where you start building all these local structures. You start identifying those female leaders who can go and become the kind of MP at the local level and then grow through the system. That's really one of the areas that is currently missing. And my biggest concern is now the whole conversation around climate change. So we are all now preparing for COP28. There will be lots of conversation about the lack of women leadership again in the climate governance kind of systems. And the key issue is how can we make women as an active actors of all of this conversation, but not as the victims of this. You know, we don't need the plans to be designed for women. We don't want the gender-blind kind of initiatives, because what is really missing now in the Global South, in the countries where at least I work closely with Aga Khan Foundation, we don't have local leaders, you know, who can join this conversation, or who can represent their communities.
That's why empowerment, NGOs, and other initiatives are so crucial. What are you missing, Trisha? What would you say? Is it money? Is it what is lacking the most?
I love that you said inequality is a political choice. It's a political will. And the good thing is political will, unlike our natural resources, is a renewable resource, right? You can renew politicians. I'm just going to piggyback to, no, it's true. I don't have any deference for that. I'm just going to piggyback to what you said in terms of let's talk about positive news. Very often when I'm invited to speak on gender-based issues, I'm told Tell me about positivity. People love to talk about gender equality, but that requires you to have honest conversations about the pervasive inequality and discrimination, the insidious nature of it, the funding and finances that go behind it, right? And that requires us to sit in a moment of honest discomfort, because the least thing we can do is bear the discomfort when that's the lived reality of people outside these highly sanitized walls. This place that we're in, I think, begets me to talk about the reality of people in the largest occupation in modern history. These are not my words. This is the word of the UN report on social and economic situation of Palestinian women and girls, dated July 2020 to June 2022, well before what happened on 7th of October, 2023. And the report elucidates, please go and read this report. The report elucidates that the attack on educational facilities, water sanitation, hygiene facilities that are being damaged and destroyed is having a direct effect on the lives of women, right? How do you have access to schools if you do not have access to sanitation? We have studies that show the second largest reason for young girls to drop out of school is sanitation, right? There's also a citation of shrinking space for civil society and human rights defenders. You cannot even document the human rights violations because you're attacking the frontline defenders. The gendered impact of, and I'm going to call it, Israeli policies that threaten eviction, military escalation, blockade, compounded by COVID, the pandemic, compounded also by the socio-cultural factors, as well as the discrimination and rights violations that Palestinian girls are facing within their own culture, means that they are the biggest casualties of this situation. I must also talk about what's happening in Sudan right now, the ethnic cleansing. Why am I talking about this? Look, because violence is not new. Women and girls paying the cost of it. And I do not like even bracketing women and children, because one is an inherent group of people that has no agency, that requires protection. So, women paying the cost for violence is not new either. I will tell you what's not new either. People from the global south, people who have professed to different religions, different geography, different skin colors, having to make a case for our humanity. How many of our women do you need to see brutalized, raped for you to give a damn? Right? Our number statistics does not match up. And that's why I talk about, you cannot talk about equality and being earnest and sincere without highlighting the deficiencies in the system. And here, as someone who wears my skin color 24/7 and bears the reality of what that looks like, not just for me, but for countless people who do not have the access to be within this space, we must have these honest conversations about who's funding this discrimination and violence. Because it is not accidental. People's money, taxpayer money, corporate money is going into this discrimination and violence. You know, it's a pyramid that is very well funded. Second, what are the politicians doing about this? Because it is their mandate to protect our rights as citizens, not protect their time in office and make sure they get re-elected, right? And third, have honest conversations centering voices in the global south. What I absolutely love about the Paris Peace Forum is it is not lost on us that we're doing this forum in Paris, right? Which compels upon us to call more and more voices from the global south and highlight these voices, not from a space of saying, what's going on in your country? How can we help you better to address the problem of violence and rape? But from a place of honesty to say, how can we serve the cause, right? So these are the conversations I think that are missing. And world leaders need to realize that people are not dispensable, that too many people are being left behind. And for your presence here to make sense, for our presence here to make sense, it has to make a difference in the lives of the people on ground. Even in France, 1 out of every 7 women gets raped here.
Absolutely, no, and we have issues all over Europe and in the United States, and I was mentioning what happens in the global north, so to speak, but what happens in the global south, what happens to every woman is crucial. And what you mentioned, I don't like the word victims. I don't want to see myself as a victim, but we are. We're the ones suffering the most, and they are the ones suffering the most from the conflicts. And we're talking in a Paris Peace Forum. So we have to talk about what's happening. We have to talk about war. There's war in Europe. There's war in Israel. There's war in so many other countries that we don't even talk about exactly. So I'm glad that you had this conversation, this reaction to my question, because if we're going to be talking about the same over and over, maybe these forums are a bit useless, and let's make this one
And we are
useful.
useless too.
No, I agree, and I think this is great. And I would like to open for the audience, but I saw that Matt wanted to react first, or should I let the audience?
Can I just say one?
Yeah, of course. I saw you wanted to.
Okay, so here's my one quick thing. First of all, I'd like to ask for applause for this last intervention because
Yeah.
it was great.
I think you deserve it.
I feel like we all wanted to applaud and nobody was like wanting to do that, so great.
did.
I'm glad we just did that. I have two last quick things to say, which is at the Global Philanthropy Project, we've always known and understood that abortion access and bodily self-determination is an LGBTI issue, full stop.
Yeah.
And then the second thing about this dissonance that you were referring to, here's another example. So in hyper-medicalized societies, mostly global North and West, the lives of intersex children are horrific. 4 surgeries happen before their first or second year of age. So non-consensual, radical medical interventions on their bodies that change the course of their life forever. And that is a feminist issue, right? Like, who decides what happens to our bodies? And so I think that, and there are lessons all over the world that are not North and West that speak directly to the value of the bodies and lives who inhabit those little babies, right? And I think that it's important for us to reconsider that the medicalization has solutions, especially for intersex children. And then the last thing I'll say is that sites where abortion does happen around the world, those are almost always sites for all kinds of people to get medical services and safety and protection, almost always. And I think that we have to consider really the impact for all of us in working together to ensure that not only that abortion access is safe, secure, available on demand everywhere all the time, and that those sites are accessible to all kinds of people. So.
Thank you. No, what really frustrates me is that we have to finish in 15 minutes, and we've posed so many questions that I think are the right ones, or at least we're getting closer to the right questions that we should be asking ourselves, and we might not have the time to answer them. But I'd like to give the floor to 1 or 2 comments from the audience, because maybe if you formulate the questions, maybe we can get faster to the answers. Please go ahead. There's a...
Thank you.
Okay, you and then...
Oh, sorry.
No, please go ahead.
Where are the men here? You're
Oh,
preaching to the converted. Gender equality is not just about women. This is a proto-feminism, and it's wrong. We cannot keep going in working on gender equality without taking into consideration men. It's just about human being. We need more female leaders. We need more men at home that want to be fathers without being judged by the society. A fight is fighting against the binaries of gender. It's just about human being having the same rights, despite their biological or societal gender. So where are they? We are still discussing about women.
Well, I see a few, I have to say, but yes, we would welcome more. I don't know if someone wants to react to that. Gulnora, I saw you nodding.
Yeah, I think it's really important. We would love to see more men in these meetings. You know, I work for Aga Khan Foundation. As I said, I run the community of practice, the gender community of practice. We have only 2 men. And every time when they join the meetings, I thank them a lot, you know, because I feel I fully hear your comment. I think already all the latest project designs that we have a specific component on engaging men and boys, because for a long time we worked in isolation. Only looking at gender or women's issue, it's easy, right? I mean, understanding the men's perspective, understanding why they are not part of this conversation is really important. And I think a couple of examples from AKF projects, at least I can briefly mention. We have a project called Emancipation in Kyrgyzstan, which is about early childhood development. We are bringing more men into the whole child care so that they spend time with their children, so that they share household responsibilities. And the reaction of these men is amazing, you know, because they're saying, I'm rediscovering my own child. Because often, I mean, we have to understand men's perspective as well. They're the main breadwinners. They don't have time to spend with their families. They're in migration. They're not around when children are growing up, right? So therefore, I think the whole kind of conversation around the care economy and how we bring men into all this conversation is really important. And yes, please, for the next Paris Peace Forum, invite more male participants.
No, we will. And you're right about the care economy, and that's something we're addressing here in France. You have to put figures into that because there is an economic perspective. And I'll go back to what Trisha was saying. Who's paying for things not to change? What's the economy behind? I know there was a question from you, Madam.
Well, first of all, I want to say thank you, Trisha. I really appreciate it. She spoke to for many of us who are here, of course. The point is, you're talking about, let's talk about the war economy. Countries that are saying human rights and justice and accuse the South for the lack of human rights. At least we are dignified when we talk about the reality of war. So one room, they are selling the weapons, and the other room, they're talking about peace. So for us, that is not lost. We are very clear. I think the power is changing. We can see West Africa and what's happening now, and their questioning of the French. So I think we have learned the hard way how to equalize and see our value politically and economically and security.
Thank you for that comment. Does anyone wants to react or yeah? Please go ahead. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Let's just wait for a mic. There you go.
Thank you very much for the panel and for the discussion. It was really very interesting, and we heard a lot that everyone on the panel was talking about the quotas and how important they are, and I'm a huge fan of quotas as well. But my question is that, from my perspective, one of the issues that comes with the quotas is also, for example, yes, there is a woman in the parliament, or she has a seat, but does she really have the authority that her seat is giving her, or is it she's there just for filling the seat? So my question would be what would be your recommendations to give the power and the authority to those women who are there? Because I really have observed, coming from the global south, at least I've observed that yes, there are women there, but do they have the voice, or it's just fulfilling it? Thank you very much.
Is it a follow-up comment?
Supplementary to that.
Okay. Yeah, sure, go ahead.
Yeah, on that point, you spoke about backlash as well, and we're seeing in a lot of countries the way that quotas have been abused to carry on business as usual. In Iraq, for example, there is a quota there, but it's the political parties use it, and the Women's Caucus there is really among the most regressive elements of the parliament, to the extent that the Jafari law was proposed by women elected through the quota system. So how do we deal with both the backlash, preventing it from co-opting things like quota systems?
Thank you. Okay, so lots of interesting questions. I suggest we respond. Perhaps you want to start about the numbers versus the reality?
Well, first of all, we need to keep the quota system. It's better to have one than not to have one. It doesn't mean that every woman, has it's a women's rights defender or a gender equality leader. It doesn't happen all the time, but we need to defend the quota system for sure. You mentioned the issue of authority and legitimacy, and I think that we're always asked if we have the credentials, if we have the merits, and I would like to see also us asking if men in different positions and roles of leadership are asked if they have the merit, if they're qualified enough. And I have suffered that myself. I'm speaking personally. I remember when I was appointed Minister of Defense of my country. Does she has the qualifications? Is she the merit? But they never asked when all the men that came before me, because they were all men, basically, so we have to be very careful with the imposter syndrome. We should not play that game. And wherever we are, we need to make the difference. And we have a lot of weight behind us, because when we are sitting in a position of decision making, we are judged and observed and looked at. Therefore, it means that we need to perform more and better. Unfortunately, that's how things are.
Can I quickly just piggyback on that? Thank you so much for highlighting that. Let's talk about data and numbers. I'm a huge fan of them, right? In countries with legislated candidature quota, there has been an increase of 5% of women representatives in parliament, as well as 7% within government, right? But this is in contrast to a study as of 15 September 2023, where only 26 countries have women heading state or government. That is the reality that we are living in right now. So let's talk about facts. You ask us, I totally understand where your question is coming from. I understand where your skepticism is coming from. Data says countries that were led by women recovered from COVID much better. Women invest 90% backwards into the economy, whereas men invest a measly 30 to 40% back into the economy. Which sectors do women invest in? Women invest in healthcare, in resilient infrastructure, in educational institutions, all of those sectors that have been drastically hit with COVID. What do all of these benefit? Directly society at large. You talk about the climate crisis. The two most cost-effective solutions for the climate crisis is investing in young girls' education, as well as sexual and reproductive health care rights. We have data that says the longer a girl studies in higher secondary education, it directly impacts the economy. We have data that says when women are participating in peace processes, it is that much more likely to succeed, that they account for the most vulnerable and marginalized. So I ask you, let's just spin the tail of the donkey. The donkey is the men in leadership positions. Absolutely. No. I am not making a case for my mediocrity or my meritocracy. I see an exhibition of mediocrity that is affecting all our lives, that is affecting our economy. If you care about the money in your pocket, look, at the end of the day, what do we all care about? We care about what's happening within our homes. Right? Do our children have access to a safe education, free education, quality education? If I fall sick, will I get access to free, good quality healthcare? Can I bring food on my table? Who is positively contributing to all of this? Women in leadership and decision-making process. There's enough data that says it. Who is adversely contributing to all of this? Men and patriarchy. So why should I make a case? You prove to me as to why it's not important.
I think, well, this I'm sure is going to create a lot of reaction, and we only have 4 minutes. But I do take the message, and I think we can all agree. No, please go ahead. No, we have to libérer la parole, as we say. And I think this is exactly what we're getting. But please go ahead for perhaps one last question.
I just wanted to talk about the idea of universality of women's rights, because I think that's also a really important aspect of this, because we can, in a perfect world, all the quotas are filled, women fill 50% of the jobs in every single sector. That doesn't necessarily address the domestic sector, in which women are, by and large, we talked briefly about the care economy, and that is largely filled by women. And it's to the fact that you have women just taking the majority of emotional labor at home, which is exhausting. So they come into their jobs every single day. And also to add to this, there's the aspect of you have women in the West and global North and women in the South who are dealing with incredibly different issues. Like as you mentioned, there's women in conflict. It's hardly fair to compare, say, my situation to a woman in Palestine right now. It's a completely different understanding of how gender has impacted on each of these situations. So I guess my question is to you, how can we attempt to sort of create an element of universalization? Because clearly every woman should have a certain amount of fundamental rights. Every queer woman or intersex person should have that same crux of what it is to be able to survive and to be able to thrive. But how do we start to actually implement that within policy framework and within these institutions that you're talking about?
That's a very interesting question. And for 2 minutes, yeah, no, I'm sure they'll be lenient and we can extend a little bit. But Gulnora,
Yeah, maybe
go ahead.
I'll start and the rest. I think it's really important question, especially from the global south, from the developing countries. What we see is the time poverty. I mean, rightly mentions that we spend more time at the household responsibilities, etc. One of the new innovations that we are now piloting across our KF regions is the affordable ECD services, early childhood development services. If you go to the rural areas, to the most mountains areas where we work, the children don't have, the children up to the age of 7, they don't have any kind of places to go. They just grow up in the streets with their grandparents and with their mother, etc. So this is like showing some promises in terms of the acceptance of the communities when they see their women walking on the ECD center, when they see the children involved, and it's a win-win situation, I think. Secondly, the whole approach around gender pair, when we bring men and women together into our workshops, we do the timing of the whole 24 hours. So women wakes up at 5 a.m., she does breakfast, she gets kids ready, and then we do the same for men. And it's really, really clear, you know, if you put it on paper and you sit down and have conversation. But again, of course, it requires lots of changes. It requires lots of social services to be available for the women to spare their time and enter the economic and the productive sphere. But yeah.
I'll share a personal one, just 1 second. When I was elected, I had all the mental burden, and I didn't even realize it. When I was elected, I covered 33 countries, so I have to travel all the time. And in a minute, my husband took over. So he can. I mean, he has the capacity. Just for some reason, he wasn't doing it. So I do feel that it takes, sometimes it takes extreme situations, such as, you know, you just don't have a choice. And it also takes legislation and infrastructure, and it takes, you know, parenthood leave for men in some occasions. It takes rethinking, and to go back to your point, it takes cultural change.
Yeah, but it shouldn't be only behavioral.
Absolutely.
You know, cultural change. It is about professionalizing care work. It's about defeminizing care work. It's about valuing care work in terms of, you know, income. And the truth is that the economy of the future is the care economy. No artificial intelligence, no new technology is going to take away the part of the economy that requires love and care for others. And that should be valued in society highly, highly valued. And so the division of labor is extremely, the gender division of labor, it's extremely important. And yet again, I think the economy of the future is the care economy. It's the only part of the economy that is based profoundly in love and care. That's what the world needs in a way, but it has to be defeminized, professionalized, highly valued, and I think that would be you know, a great way, you know, for a power shift, because at the end of the day, women's rights and gender equality is about power sharing. It's a power issue, a political issue, but also a power issue.
It is indeed, and what you just said would open a total different debate about, you know, how do we think about of economy? And we started that conversation after COVID, when we realized how important, I mean, we knew it, but we felt it, how important teachers were, how important caregivers were. And 3 years after, it's as if nothing had happened. So I think it's important to point it out. We're out of time, but I think I would like to hear just one last message. I would say a positive one, but if it's not a positive one, who cares? An honest one, to close this debate and to close this honest conversation. Matt, would you like to start as the minority on the panel?
Oh, with me? Well, I guess
Take your mic.
Because I can talk a little bit about financing. I want to say that over the 2-year period of 2019 and 2020, all LGBTI grant making in the entire world, donor governments, private foundations, public foundations, and high net wealth individuals, we produce that report every other year, so we know, was less than the complete reconstruction of the MoMA Museum. So finance matters.
Thank you.
Just to piggyback on that and to answer your question in terms of what could we do to ensure, President Macron spoke about this many years ago very valiantly when he said, if we ensure women have guaranteed access to sexual and reproductive health care, they will have a direct say in how many children they have, family planning, right? So that goes a long way in terms of care economy. The second factor, financial autonomy. So body autonomy, financial autonomy, and guaranteed education to healthcare, and being able to access public places without worrying about your safety. If you attend to all of this, you will make sure the care economy issue that you're talking about is automatically addressed.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think I'm really positive. I mean, from the youth engagement and the whole use of social media and technology, we do see that the feminists, the younger feminist groups, they're organizing themselves, they're putting petitions, they are vocal about many issues. I do see the younger generation of men are more acceptable of their wives' ambitions, of the support. And yeah, I think it's really important that, as the gentleman rightly mentioned, we don't isolate the gender women issues. Again, it's around equal access to opportunities, it's around equal access to resources, and yeah, this is all about gender equality.
Thank you.
Well, you know, basically, I would say that we cannot afford the luxury of pessimism when we look at the numbers, when we look at the gaps, when we look at the transactional nature of inequalities, because it's not women in abstract. It's indigenous women, it's women in conflict, it's rural women, it's women with disabilities. You know, it's all of that together. And when we see the complexity of that, we tend to just paralyze, get, you know, what to do. It's so big, you know, it's so complicated. And I would say, you know, basically, we cannot afford paralysis or inaction. We need to continue to working together. We need to continue to raise our voices. At the end of the day, this is also a war of narratives and a war of power. And I really think that we can win the war to build societies that are more human, that are more equal, that are more loving, that are more caring. And I think, I strongly believe that radical love is the answer.
Thank you so much. So let's win the war of love. And thank you to all the wonderful panelists. Have a great rest of the forum, and thank you so much for being here. Thank you.
Thank you for this only one session on gender and women's rights of the forum. Woo!